Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Puerto Rico Energy Forum's latest news roundup. We are back with another edition, bringing you the most recent news and a little bit of our analysis. We just released yesterday a conversation with our friend and neighborhood doctor, Angel Sayas of AZ Engineering and Martes Informativo fame. We talked about politics, money, and the potential social divide that fights over solar energy in Puerto Rico are creating. Take a listen. But for now, your news. It is early March, and Puerto Rico's energy sector is seeing significant corporate reshuffling alongside the usual policy chaos. A consortium led by BlackRock and EQ2 just bought AES Corporation, the parent company of AES Puerto Rico, for $10.7 billion. This raises questions about what is this going to mean for local coal operations and the solar projects they're contracted to build and operate. The company was embattled financially for years, and this will provide them key operating capital for improvements, maintenance, and supporting uptime of operations. Meanwhile, today, LUMA announced that Juan Saca is going to be out as their CEO, replaced by Jenis Quinones, effective March 30th. You might remember Quinones as the former head of Los Angeles' Department of Water and Power, who made headlines last January during the fires as they tore through the valley. Juan Saca is going to stay on as an advisor, but there'll be a new face of the operations. We'll keep you posted as more comes out. Now, let's get into this week's headlines. Headline number 1. PREPA wants $307 million annually for pensions and simultaneously wants to suspend the rate case while it figures this out. It is day 3,168 of PREPA's bankruptcy, and the public utility projects it needs more than $307 million annually starting next fiscal year to cover pension payments under the PAYGO model, according to a motion filed with the Energy Bureau. The numbers are brutal: $211 million for fiscal year 2026, upping to $307 million for fiscal year 2027, and holding at that number for fiscal year 2028. It's a $96 million increase in a single year. The pension component now represents the single largest line item in PREPA's rate-funded revenue requirement for fiscal year 2026. Total requests are around $330 million, of which $211 million goes exclusively to pensions. PREPA clarified it's not requesting an increase in the base rate, but rather asking the Bureau to, quote, redistribute funds within the existing rate structure to allow recovery of these expenses. Translation: PREPA wants the money, but doesn't want political responsibility for raising the rates. Fiscal Board Executive Director Robert Mujica, who we'll talk about in a little while, was blunt about the alternatives. The options are: don't fund the pensions, fund them through the electric rate, or find another source. Currently, they're in the rate. Transferring payment to the general fund would require approximately $300 million annually against a total obligation of around $4 billion, and Puerto Rico's general fund is already bankrupt. This is the rotten core of Puerto Rico's utility economics. PREPA accumulated $4 billion in unfunded pension liabilities through decades of fiscal mismanagement. Those chickens are now coming home to roost, and ratepayers are holding the bag. There's no good solution. Either ratepayers pay through higher bills, taxpayers pay through the general fund, or retirees don't get paid. But here's what makes this motion especially galling. PREPA is simultaneously asking to suspend the rate case proceeding until legal challenges against LUMA are resolved. You can't demand money while refusing to participate in a process that determines how much you actually need. This is PREPA trying to have it both ways, securing pension funding while avoiding regulatory scrutiny of whether its operations justify the costs. It's not going to work. Headline number 2. Construction begins on the Costa Sur batteries and peakers projects. Actual infrastructure is finally moving forward. Governor González Colón announced construction has started on rapid response peakers generation and battery storage at Costa Sur. This is legitimately good news. The Costa Sur peaker plant includes 2 Siemens Energy SGT 800 turbines with combined capacity of 100 megawatts, capable of operating on liquefied natural gas and diesel for rapid response during high demand. With $446.2 million in federal investment and projected operations by the end of 2027, island-wide peakers program will add 244 megawatts of flexible generation across Costa Sur, Jabucoa, and Jobos, using 8 new turbines with total federal investment of nearly $1 billion. The battery storage component is equally significant. Costa Sur's project has 30 megawatt capacity, funded with $73 million, installing 40 Tesla Megapack batteries. The broader island-wide battery program contemplates 430 megawatts distributed across 6 plants, with almost $800 million in federal investment. This represents real infrastructure actually getting built with committed federal funding and realistic timelines. Peakers provide the flexible, fast response generation Puerto Rico desperately needs to handle demand spikes and generation failures. Batteries provide the grid stabilization, and backup power. Both are critically essential pieces of a functional grid. Question is whether this becomes a model for how procurement should work: clear scope, committed funding, experienced contractors, realistic timelines, or whether it's an exception that proves the rule. Genera deserves a lot of credit for executing on these projects. Now we need to see if this is the same level of competence applied to new generation. Now we need to see the same level of competence applied to new generation procurement, transmission upgrades, and distribution modernization. These are the projects that prove Puerto Rico can actually build energy infrastructure when federal money is available. Challenge is replicating this success across the rest of the transformation. Headline number 3. The IRP process moves forward. LUMA projects 4,364 megawatts needed in the next 5 years, but procurement remains the bottleneck. The integrated resource plan process is advancing. The Energy Bureau deemed LUMA's October filing was complete. Now adjudication has begun. There's a technical hearing scheduled for March 18th, and interveners have until March 30th to file petitions if they want to participate. For masochists seeking bedtime reading, the 675-page filing is available. Bottom line, LUMA projects Puerto Rico needs to add 1,364 megawatts of generation capacity over the next 5 years to achieve a 98% reduction in customer outages caused by generation failures. It's an enormous number, roughly double Puerto Rico's current installed capacity. Here's where it gets complicated. This is an unenviable position for LUMA. They don't generate electrons. Their sister operator, Genera, suffers from the same abusive parents. Both face a bankrupt asset owner in PREPA as a key obstacle to achieving this work. And there's a procurement graveyard reminiscent of the Shadowlands in The Lion King. It's dark, it's scary, and it's littered with failed procurement attempts. We still don't have the right combination of factors to attract competitive project developers. LUMA can identify what's needed, model required capacity additions, and publish detailed resource plans. But if developers don't trust that winning bids will turn into signed contracts, that signed contracts will turn into energized projects, and that energized projects will receive reliable payment, they won't participate. We have a procurement graveyard because institutional risk is too high. Until Puerto Rico fixes underlying dynamics, i.e., PREPA's bankruptcy, regulatory uncertainty, payment reliability, and political stability, no amount of resource planning will conjure competitive bids from developers who have been burned before. The IRP tells us what we need. It doesn't tell us how to build the institutional capacity to actually get it. This 4,300 megawatts projection isn't just ambitious, it's aspirational in a system where developers routinely walk away from signed contracts because they don't trust they'll be paid. Headline number 4. Solar industry is bracing for a slowdown as the sales tax exemption ends. The solar industry is anticipating significant slowdown if the sales tax, the EVU, exemption on solar panels and batteries is eliminated. This exemption has been a key driver of Puerto Rico's explosive residential solar growth, over 180,000 metered customers with more than 1.3 megawatts of installed capacity. Removing it would immediately increase upfront costs for new equipment by 11.5%, making solar less accessible exactly when distributed generation is proving to be one of Puerto Rico's few energy success stories. The economic reality: residential solar adoption in Puerto Rico has been driven by 4 factors: unreliable grid service creating demand for backup power and incredibly high costs, federal investment tax credits reducing costs, the net metering program payouts, and local EVU exceptions. Remove one leg of that stool and the market contracts. Solar industry argues this is exactly the wrong time to slow distributed generation growth. Every rooftop solar system is one less customer dependent on an unreliable grid during outages, one less household contributing to peak demand, and one more source of distributed resilience. But the legislature is looking for revenue, and tax exemptions are easy targets. Currently, Puerto Rico pays the highest sales tax in the country and is the most desperate for collections. Maybe there's a middle ground. Get rid of all exemptions, but lower the rate from 11.5% to something nationally acceptable, like 5% on everything. No picking winners and losers, and simultaneously incentivizing consumption to fill municipal and state level coffers. It hardly fixes the problem, but it seems like a conversation worth having. And finally, headline number 5. The Fiscal Oversight and Management Board is trying to walk a tightrope. They aren't defending LUMA and Genera, but they're not supporting the end of their contracts either. The Fiscal Oversight and Management Board is trying to make a distinction that may sound prudent, but ultimately collapses under its own logic. It says it is not defending LUMA and Genera, while also warning that any future operator will face an even harder job because of grid deterioration, PREPA's bankruptcy, politicization, and institutional instability. That position is not sustainable. If the board truly believes Puerto Rico is not going back to the old public monopoly model, and that any replacement will also be private, then it cannot keep speaking as if defending private operators is somehow optional, improper, or politically untouchable. At some point, defending the companies and the contractual framework around them becomes part of defending Puerto Rico's own energy future. This does not mean saying LUMA and Genera are beyond criticism. They're not. It does mean, however, recognizing a basic market reality. When the government and public institutions signal that private operators will be blamed, politically isolated, and denied institutional backing, even while being asked to manage a decaying grid under bankruptcy, the result is predictable. Fewer qualified firms will participate. Those that do will price in higher risk, and performance challenges will worsen under a thinner field of operators. In other words, the board cannot have it both ways. It cannot say private participation is necessary and refuse to defend the legitimacy of private operators doing their work. It cannot acknowledge worsening operating conditions and remain publicly neutral when politicization is part of the problem. It cannot expect long-term private investment in infrastructure without insisting on the government responsibility, contractual stability, and professional treatment of counterparties necessary to attract it. The board is correct about one thing: the next operator would likely inherit an even more difficult system. But that is precisely why this "we are not defenders" posture is so damaging. If Puerto Rico wants credible private engagement going forward, public institutions, including the FOMB, must be willing to defend not just abstract fiscal stability, but the practical conditions that make private participation possible. Clear rules, accountable government conduct, contract continuity, and a serious effort to depoliticize the system operations. You do not have to endorse every action by LUMA or Genera to say that openly. You do, however, have to choose whether you are building a credible operating environment for private infrastructure partners or eroding it. Right now, the FOMB is trying to do both. All right, that's your brief for this week. The common thread: Puerto Rico's energy sector is both progress and chaos, small wins and total dysfunction. Key things to watch for the next week and for this month are how the IRP moves forward, what kind of participation the process sees, and whether the announced procurements, initiated construction projects, and ongoing distributed energy adoption continue apace. All right, thanks so much for tuning in. Let us know what you think we missed, got wrong, or completely nailed. We'll talk to you soon.